All right, well, hello. This is Rob Thompson. I'm one of the instructors for 128, and I'm going to be briefly introducing the first assessment to you all, going over some of the main things you should be aware of, maybe some points where I think you might have trouble, and I'll try to forewarn you about that, and just in general, give you a sense for what you're going to be doing for this assessment. We're going to try these videos out to start. There's nothing in here I'll mention that you can figure out on your own or could find in the write-up for the assignment. But if you prefer a more video audio approach, then you can stick around with me for a few minutes as I do this with you all. So I'm going to start on the assessment one page on Canvas. This is where you're going to find most of what you need to do the assessment. I'm also importantly going to be assuming you've already set up your auto grader. There are other videos for how to do that, so I will leave those to their own time. Instead, I'm just going to go over briefly what's going on this page, and then we can dive into writing some code and what that might look like. So on this overview page, the first part is just going to be the links to the write-up and the autograder. Those are the two things you're probably most interested in seeing for each given assessment. Below that, for this week at least, we have a setup guide for how to get the autograder running. There will, again, also be another video for that if you want to see that. Below that is the expected input-output format for each assessment. This will not change week to week, and I'm going to explain this more when we get into the actual coding part. Below that is the requirements for your header comment. This is basically just giving yourself credit for the thing you've done, so be sure to include that header comment at the start of every one of your code files you submit. I'll show you what I like to do with that when we get to the coding. Below that is some information about the grading. While you are very strongly encouraged to run the autograder as many times as you want locally, just know that to actually get credit, you need to submit on Gradescope and pass the tests there. The tests on Gradescope are largely the same as the local ones, so it shouldn't come as a shock, but there are a few extra ones on there just to keep everybody honest. There's the reflection after that. We'll come back to that after we wrap up most of our code. And that is pretty much all I wanted to point out on this page. So let's go ahead and get to VS Code where we can start to write some stuff. So I've already opened up my base folder in VS Code. I assume, again, I've set up my autograder already, so it is all here. Watch the other video if you're not sure how to get to this point. But I'm going to start right from my student work where I've set up a new file, submission.py. So in that folder, that file is where I'm going to write all of my solution here. I can start to write it immediately. So let's go ahead and do that. First things first is for any new file, I should give myself credit, put my name on it. So I'm going to do that. My header comment, Rob Thompson here. I'm going to include my section. I'm in D and G, at least that's what I teach. For the other one, I need the name of the assessment. That's A1. I need my references. In this case, I'm probably not going to need too much help, so I can leave that blank. But if you are going to office hours, getting help from a friend, anything like that, be sure to include their name. We really appreciate it, and it can help save time and maybe some heartache in the future with possible plagiarism cases. So we appreciate that. And then lastly, the time, I don't know, this might be a 10-minute video, something like that. So once I've done that, I'm ready to start writing some code. Of course, I might not know what code I need to write yet because I haven't read what this assignment's all about. So back on Canvas, let me go ahead and do that. I will actually open this PDF file here, and let's see what we're looking at. This write-up, we're calling it often, is going to be introducing you to what the assessment is about, what you're going to be doing for it, specifying the expected input and output, giving you example cases to follow, and giving you the reflection prompt. So lots of useful information here. You're going to want to read each of these carefully and probably refer back to them as you go. The broad sections for this assessment, we've got the introduction. That's just trying to very briefly explain what the overall gist of what you're doing is. There's the problem section that goes into much more detail. It's going to be usually the longest section for each write-up here. For this first assignment, and for all assignments, we try to theme them around real problems you might encounter in an engineering field, not just in CS-related stuff either. These are sourced from other departments on campus that tell us about or told us about how they like to use computers and programming for their work. And because we're the Colorado School of Mines, of course, our first assignment is around mining. So with this assignment, you're reading a bit more about how a mine operation even works, and some details around budgeting for it. And your program that you're writing is going to be managing those budget items and reporting whether running a speculative mine is going to be worth it or not in the end, depending on things like the price of gold at the time. So something you might actually feasibly do if you are on a mine kind of discovery and planning team. The full details of that I will leave to you to read, but some things to point out in our explanation text. Anything we expect to directly correspond to something you need to do in your program, we're going to include that in bold. We know the text can be a little long, so this will help kind of keep track of things. So for instance, at some point in our code, we need to accept some input from the user that will represent the name of the mine that we are making this budget for. After that, we need to write some code to calculate the total of all the development costs and at some point print that sum as well. So that kind of thing. You can read through it as long or as fast or as you like. After that whole section is a few others. There's the input that is laying out exactly or sort of summarizing exactly what your code needs to take in as input, and then the output doing the same at the other end. So what exactly does your code need to print to satisfy the autograder and us instructors? After that is the reflection section where we'll come back to that after we write some code, but that would be kind of what prompt you're writing for this time. And then lastly, some example executions, trying to show the full experience of running your code, what it might look like, both when it's accepting input and printing out output there. In this case, we've got two examples. Here's the first input and the first output, and then the same for another case below. So back in our code here, let's start to write some of this. Again, I'm not going to do all of it for you, but we'll at least get some basic structure here. First thing I remember from the write-up is I need to get the name of the mine from the user. They're going to give that to me. So I could make a new variable name and accept the input from the user. And this is where our input-output format for assessments comes in. You never have to include the prompt for an input, but you'll find it's pretty useful, especially if you're running your code yourself. So I might include that. And maybe that's usually just one uppercase all caps letter or word, and then a caret sign and a space. So with that, we're ready to accept the name. The other value I need to accept is the price. We can do something really similar for that. I'll just include a different prompt to avoid confusing the user. This line is not quite done. There's something else I should be doing here. I'm going to leave that for you to figure out, though. I don't want to give you everything up front, but I will at least warn you, this isn't quite done yet. But assuming I've accepted my inputs, the next step would be to do all those calculations, and that's going to be laid out in the document. These are going to be using the standard operators that we've learned about this week, so plus, minus, times, divide. You probably won't even need integer division or modulo. Those are going to be really useful for us, but they'll come in a bit later. So assuming I've got all that done and I've got all my variables I need, the last part would be to actually make some output. So for those, that's going to be a series of print statements. Here's something that's important to note is that our autograder ignores any prints that your program produces unless they specifically start with the word output in all caps. Unless that is there, it is going to be ignored. This is actually for your benefit because it means you can print whatever you like in your program. If you have debugging prints or just additional prompts, context, anything like that, that's totally fine. You never have to get rid of those. But it does mean you need to pay attention for the lines that should be read by the autograder. And again, you just need the word output in front of each of those lines. So we might do that, and then we could look back at what those outputs need to actually be. That's down here. So we can see the first line of output is going to be just some text kind of titling this report that we're generating, investment planning report of blank mine. So I can do something like that, investment planning report of, and then we need to include the name of the mine, and that's where we use our variable from our input, or maybe something we calculated. And then after that, the word mine. When we're printing this, this is fine because we don't have spaces after of or before mine, but those spaces are going to be added when print combines all of these strings together. So we can do that. After that, we're going to need various numbers. I'm going to leave you to figure out what those are, but we eventually need to print out 5 other things. So I'm just going to copy paste those right here. So we have the correct number of output lines at least. And with that, let's see how things are doing. So I'm going to save this file and I'm going to run my AutoGrader. Again, you should have seen this earlier in the other video if you have trouble with that, but I'm going to open up a terminal. I'm going to cd into my specific assessment folder, which is S24A1. I'll hit tab to complete that. And from here, I just type Python, test my work. Again, tab helps here. So I'll run that and let's see what we've got. There's a little bit of module installing going on here. That's fine. You might not have that, but that's normal if you do see it. And then what we've got are 6 tests that ran, and it looks like I failed all of them. So this is not shocking. Most of my outputs aren't really set up yet, but let's see why I failed. I can at least see that. And up here, we can see that I have failed all these tests seemingly on the same line, and this is a number line. So it's checking each input one by one, kind of in order, and it liked the first line of input. There was no error with that. If I had changed something about it and we rerun the, like maybe I'll add a period at the end here, we run this again. As soon as it gets itself all set up, we can see I'm still failing tests, but now it's failing that first line. So I did do that right, and I probably shouldn't have added that period there, but it's then just going to the next line, checking that one, and seeing that my value is not correct. So if we scroll back up, we can still see that what should have been something like 550 million was actually just 0. So we should probably work on fixing that. But this is a good approach to developing your solution overall. Start with some lines, see if you can make progress. You don't immediately have to start passing tests, but as long as you can clearly get further along in them, then that is enough. And eventually you'll be able to pass all of them and start getting that full credit. So that is what I wanted to mention there. There's one other thing I'll point out, which is depending on how you're doing your calculations, you might be ending up with float values, numbers that have decimal point and values after that. For this assignment, we just want you to report integers. So if you're getting other values, you need to turn them into integers. And you've seen a function that'll do that for you. It's called the int function. Anything you put in those parentheses will turn into an integer if at all possible. These are simple because they're just zeros, but if I eventually had variables I wanted to put in here, I could turn those into integers right before I print them, and that might be a useful way to make sure everything's in the right format. So just a reminder there. Once I'm ready and I'm passing all of my tests locally, then I'm going to want to upload that to Gradescope and make sure I'm passing all my tests there, and you probably are. And then from there, you are done with your code portion. The other part of the assignment is the reflection. So let's get back to that. For each of the assignments or assessments in this class, we're asking you to do a short reflection. This is to try to couch some of the things you're doing into more of a real world scenario. If you actually were managing the budgeting for a mine, there's all sorts of things you would need to consider that we're not asking you to do because we're not an actual mining class, but we want to at least have you make gestures towards that. So for this first assessment, what we're asking you to do is to reflect a little bit on what a reclamation cost is. This is one of the budget items that's mentioned earlier. It's one of the last things you pay for in a mining operation, and it's a fairly hefty amount, 150 million for our budgeting here. So why is that there? What does a reclamation cost even include? And why would that be important to this budgeting? That's what we're asking you to talk about for about 1 to 2 paragraphs. We're not looking for any particular response, just that you've clearly tried to reflect. If you find yourself looking up anything like what the heck a mining reclamation cost is, then at least cite that by including the link to whatever source you used. We're not asking for a full formal citation format, but it will at least credit whoever you did benefit from. So submit that as a PDF to the separate submission on Gradescope. It doesn't go to the same place as your code. make sure to avoid that mistake. But there will be another assignment on Canvas or on Gradescope that you can submit to instead. Once you've got both your code and your reflections submitted, that is it. You are done with the assessment at that point. So good luck working on it. Do let us know if you have any questions, and do let us know if you watched and enjoyed this video. If you found it useful, we're still trying to decide if we want to do these for the other assessments, and hearing your feedback on that will be a big part of determining if we are going to make more of these. So we will see you in class. And again, good luck with assessment 1.